Welcome to Coworking Insights podcast. Coworking Insights. We're going to give you data in kilobytes.
Welcome back to episode 4 of the Coworking Insights podcast. I'm here with Madison Maidman, our COO. We're going to talk a little bit about the distribution of co-working spaces globally. Madison, great to have you on.
Hey, nice to talk to everyone. Thanks for joining me, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of fun stuff. We actually just got back from a team retreat down in Mexico, and it was a lot of fun. We're going to talk about that towards the end and bring it back and relate some interesting data points to that. But I thought we'd start off just talking about what we're seeing in terms of where spaces are located around the world. And we've broken that into percents or percentiles for every continent. Madison, maybe you can start off with where the most co-working spaces in the world are currently located.
Yeah, so based off of a report that we pulled with almost 11,000 spaces around the world earlier this year, we are seeing the largest amount of growth currently happening in the United States, India, and the UK. That being said, the largest distribution areas that we have on the site at the moment are Europe, Asia, and then next is North America. So it's really interesting just to see the growth in the US, particularly as the co-working trend keeps on.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I went and saw my parents who just retired up in South Carolina. And in the South, there's all these really small, quaint towns that were probably once booming metropolises, but now there's no one there. There's maybe 300 or 400 residents of the city. And I was going down one of these old town streets, and I looked up and there's this building being renovated. And I was peering in the window, and a lady on the street said, "Do you want to take a peek in?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. What are you building?" And she's like, "Oh, we're opening a co-working space." And
No way.
That's in this little town called Oaxaca. And if you guys want to check it out, it's a neat little town, but I think it's reminiscent of what is actually happening, not just in the US, but globally, where lots of little towns that have an audience in this town, Oaxaca, a lot of retirees, a lot of a few developers, we heard from them, and they're building co-working spaces to capture that audience. And I think this is happening all over the world, and specifically in the USA.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, especially in the UK. I think another note to that is just that people are typically wanting to live in the smaller towns. The cost of living is a little bit less. They really feel grounded in those communities, and co-working spaces allow them to stay there and work from those towns, opposed to feeling the need to have to move to a bigger city or commute every day. So it's fantastic to see that co-working is growing with that demand and is catering to remote workers and startups and tech talent all over the world.
That's right. So right now we're seeing the biggest distribution of spaces globally is in Europe at 32%. It's not a perfect illustration of global co-working, but we feel it's statistically accurate. And that's followed by Asia right now at 28%. And as you said, Madison, lots of growth coming out of booming India.
Yeah, so at the moment, we have on average 3 spaces from India adding themselves to Coworker every single day. So that equals about 60 new spaces in India alone adding themselves each month. So I think this is a really great illustration and just how fast India is growing, especially in comparison to other markets around the world.
Yep, absolutely. So India right now, the number 2 country on Coworker, just behind the United States, and North America as a whole is making up 23.7% of global co-working spaces, with South America the 4th top continent with about 7%.
Oh, that's really interesting. What's even more interesting about that is just in between North America and South America lies Central America, and we actually are seeing that is one of the slowest growth areas for co-working. There are a few theories as to why this might be. The one, I think, is just an overall presence of the infrastructure for co-working spaces. In the big cities, there is infrastructure there for internet speed, Wi-Fi, everything you need to run a successful co-working space. But once you kind of start moving outside of those metropolitan areas, I think it's a little bit more challenging to bring things like fiber and Wi-Fi into those areas. So I think There is the emergence of co-working spaces outside of those cities, but it's just a little bit slower than in some of the other areas
That's
that
right.
are in our network.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. Panama City and San Jose in Costa Rica, kind of the two more developed markets for co-working in Central America. But let's talk quickly about our experience, because we just went down to Mexico. Actually, Mexico is part of North America, but it's towards the southern side of Mexico, getting close to some of the neighboring countries, Guatemala, Belize. And, we had an experience there. We went down there to get FaceTime with our team, but we were also we were also co-working in a sense and getting a lot of work done. I ran the numbers, and average price in Mexico for a desk is $129 a month. We've talked about this on other previous episodes. The global average right now for monthly desks is $189 a month. So Mexico at $129 on the whole, much cheaper than the global average. But where we just were for a good part of the trip, Playa del Carmen, $219. So much higher than the average in Mexico, and also higher than the global average.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons why you might see a price like $219 in Playa del Carmen is because it typically is more of a touristic area. So you're driving a lot more of North American, Western travelers there, bringing the overall cost of really everything from accommodations to food up. So that would make sense that the price of co-working would go up as well. One interesting note to kind of play off of there is that we were working out of a co-working space. I guess it's a network of co-working spaces called Selina, and they were able to keep their prices pretty competitive to the Mexico average. Their Playa del Carmen location was about $160 a month. So still a little bit above the Mexico average, but still below the general Playa del Carmen average.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about what Selina's doing, at least from the co-work standpoint, is they're trying to capture much more of the overall customer's day. So they have food and beverage, they have pools, they have, of course, co-living accommodations, but they've started introducing these really fantastic co-working spaces. And so really, when you get down there and you're in that ecosystem, you're able to spend a lot of your day from kind of bed to workspace to food and beverage and everything in between at Selina. So I think they're doing a really good job of monetizing an average customer, where a typical co-working space may only be able to monetize them in a couple of different ways. Selina is really trying to capture a larger part of that customer's transactions in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think just the co-working in these areas in general are just such a great way to connect local talent and people who might be just traveling and working while they're on the road. So it was really great to see that in Selina, having people who are working in the area in the co-working space, along with people from really all over the world. So I look forward to seeing this as a global trend in the co-working market as a whole.
I do too. And now the area down there is called Quintana Roo. That's kind of the Yucatan Peninsula, or a good part of it. The government is working on a pretty large overall I guess it's kind of a development plan, and it's aimed to really bring a lot more of, not necessarily digital nomads, but remote workers, people that are able to work from a location of their choice, whether it's all year round or maybe just a few months around. And they're really trying to tap into this emerging demographic of North America, right? And trying to bring a lot of them down, whereas maybe they would choose right now to go to Europe or Asia for working remote. Now they're trying to bring them down to the Yucatan Peninsula. And I see a really, really good opportunity there. But obviously, as some of the reasons you just pointed out, Madison, there's still a long ways that they need to go in building up infrastructure and being able to retain those people for a much longer duration than just maybe 7 days.
Yeah, I think a really excellent example that our contact at Selina mentioned was that Oaxaca is a really cool community in Mexico. It's kind of more of a bohemian surf town, but there was really no internet there. Like, people would all gather at this one cafe. So Selina has worked, and they've built the very first co-working space in Oaxaca. So it's not only allowing locals to come there and work and enjoy the Oaxaca area, but it's also bringing another level of tourism there, because now people can go there with confidence that they can visit the area and get work done, where before they might not have been able to take that risk.
Oaxaca in Mexico and Walhalla in South Carolina, two booming co-working markets. Now, glad to see they both got their first space, and I do think this is happening in so many cities across the world, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great when co-working as a global market is matured. and you'll be able to find great space just about anywhere. So just to summarize quick on the global distribution of co-working spaces, right now, 32% in Europe, 28% in Asia, followed by North America at almost 24%, South America at 7%, Africa at 4.4%, Oceania, which is kind of Australia, New Zealand, and some of the surrounding Micronesian islands, is 3.5%, and Central America at 1%. And as Madison pointed out earlier, we're seeing the quickest growth in the USA, India, and UK, and I think that's pretty consistent with global research and also correlated to the growth that we're seeing of new spaces adding to coworker.com.
Just to conclude, if anyone has any data that they would love to hear on the Coworking Insights podcast, please feel free to email us. We will do our best to pull all the data from Coworker and share it with the global coworking community.
Absolutely. If you enjoy some of these data points, check out our report section. We just published our 2019 Desk Price Index. We analyze desk prices from continents, countries, and cities across the world. And next week, we will be publishing our Capacity Index, which will show a similar data point, but just about how much space and capacity a typical space has. So look forward to that. Thank you guys all for listening, and stay tuned next week for another great episode.
Thank you for listening to the Coworking Insights podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode and more.